Let's dive right into this explainer and unpack the fascinating and sometimes mind-boggling mechanics behind public expenditure. As a social policy researcher, I spend a lot of time looking at how societies evolve. And if there's one universal truth I've found, it's that the cost of running a country continually increases. There's really no way around it. Today, we're going to figure out exactly why that is, and we're going to focus heavily on how population dynamics and the modern welfare state actually drive these massive, multi-trillion-dollar budgets.
So, we have to start by asking ourselves this core question. It is incredibly easy to just look at a national budget and feel totally overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the numbers. But the thing is, these budgets don't just expand in a vacuum. They grow in direct response to the shifting demands of the societies they govern. If we want to really understand the numbers, we have to understand the human pressures behind them. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll quickly define public spending, categorize the costs, and then dive deep into the political, social, and economic forces driving these budgets upward.
Okay, Section 1, Defining Public Spending.
Think about this through a simple household analogy. Just as a family has to consume and spend to survive, buying groceries, paying the electricity bill, fixing a leaky roof, the government has to spend money to operate and fulfill its duties to the public. In fact, public expenditure is literally the engine of the entire system. It occupies the exact same central place in public finance that consumption occupies in general economics. The sheer breadth of the government's objectives is pretty staggering when you lay it all out. We aren't just talking about keeping the lights on at City Hall. The mandate ranges from basic necessities like funding police for internal peace and armies for external protection, all the way to incredibly complex macroeconomic interventions. The government steps in to manage inflation and deflation. It actively pursues social welfare, and it uses tools like taxes to try and ensure a fairer distribution of income and assets between the rich and the poor. It's a massive, multifaceted job. Moving on to Section 2, let's categorize these costs. So, there is a fundamental split in how economists view government spending. On one hand, you have developmental or productive expenditure. This acts a lot like an investment because it improves the productive capacity of the economy. Interestingly, while things like education and health used to be considered non-developmental, they're now rightfully recognized as building human capital, which absolutely promotes economic growth. On the other hand, we have non-developmental or unproductive expenditure. This includes the police, defense, and the courts. Now, quick clarification, unproductive doesn't mean wasteful, not at all. It just means these expenses are more in the nature of consumption. They are totally necessary to maintain law and order, but they don't directly add to the productive efficiency of the economy itself. The really crucial point here is understanding the accounting breakdown between everyday recurring expenses and long-term investments. Revenue expenditure is recurring. It happens regularly. Think of the monthly salaries for civil administration or military personnel. It keeps things running, but it doesn't create new physical assets. Capital expenditure, however, is non-recurring. This is the big money spent on acquiring actual physical assets: land, buildings, dams, steel plants, heavy machinery. This is the developmental spending that literally builds the physical infrastructure of a nation. Having mapped out the basic categories of what the government buys, we need to pivot from the what to the why. Why do these numbers, whether we're talking revenue or capital, just relentlessly expand year after year? Section 3. Let's look at the political pressures. There is a very practical reality to modern governance that we can't ignore. The global shift toward democracy inherently costs more than totalitarian forms of government. Running a democracy is fundamentally expensive. You have the massive direct costs of running national elections and by-elections. On top of that, the number of ministers and executive officers just naturally tends to increase. And perhaps most importantly, ruling parties must continually launch new programs and fulfill campaign promises to maintain public support, which means they're constantly providing new amenities and opportunities to the public. Another major driver is international insecurity. This forces an undeniable, often massive, increase in public spending on defense. Just to put this into perspective, take a look at India's defense expenditure in the 2015-16 period. It was over 143,000 crore rupees. Back in 1980-81, that number was just over 3,200 crore. Because the international political situation is often so uncertain, nations are practically forced to spend heavily to protect their sovereignty, which drives that non-developmental expenditure skyward. All right, Section 4, social drivers. This right here is the core of our analysis today. It's where the relationship between the government and the citizen really takes center stage. The compounding pressure on the state builds in 3 distinct steps. When we analyze the modern welfare state, we see a clear progression. It moves from unavoidable demographic realities all the way to the advanced welfare expectations of the modern citizen. And every single step dramatically redefines the financial obligations of the government. Let's break them down one by one. Step 1 is just simple mathematics: population growth. Populations have been on the increase in almost all countries of the world. As global populations expand, the baseline responsibilities of the state scale up directly. I mean, you need more police officers, more judges, and more administrative staff just to maintain the exact same baseline level of service. Every new citizen requires a fraction of state resources, so population growth is really the foundational multiplier for all public expenditure. Before a government even decides to add a single new program, its budget has to increase simply because there are more people to serve. Step 2 is the dramatic expansion of social services. Over time, the scope of the government's job description has widened incredibly. Generalized services that might have once been handled privately or maybe by local communities are now strictly considered the duty of the state. We are talking about massive, continuous undertakings like universal education, public health initiatives, and managing municipal water supply and sanitation. Furthermore, entirely new specialized departments have been established to address specific societal needs. Think departments dedicated entirely to child welfare, women welfare, and labor welfare. Every single new department represents a new, permanent, and growing line item in the national budget. And that brings us to Step 3, social security measures. The modern political philosophy is abundantly clear on this point. Modern states are welfare states. The government is actively expected to intervene to lift up lower-income living standards. This means spending huge amounts of capital on direct benefits. We see this everywhere, through the provision of old-age pensions for the elderly, sickness and accident benefits for workers, free education, and even free medical care specifically for industrial workers. The social contract between the state and the citizen has evolved far beyond just providing basic protection. Delivering on this deeply ingrained social contract requires an immense, ever-growing pool of funds. Finally, Section 5. Let's look at the underlying economic causes.
The first economic cause is something we all feel personally: inflation. After the Second World War, there's been a gradual increase in the price level globally. This means governments have to spend more money just to buy the exact same amount of goods and services they bought last year. They also have to constantly increase the salaries and allowances of government employees to keep pace with the cost of living. And alongside those rising prices, we see massive public sector growth. In India, for example, the public sector outlay during the first 5-year plan was just under 2,000 crore rupees. By the 11th plan, that had exploded to over 3.6 million crore. The state is continually expanding its economic footprint, even providing direct economic assistance and subsidies to private enterprises.
The numbers also show a dramatic shift in how money is prioritized over time. In 1950-51, only 36.2% of spending went to development. By 2015-16, that had surged to nearly 60%. Governments are giving incredibly high priority to expensive infrastructure projects. We're talking about developing roads, expanding railways, constructing canals, and funding energy production. This is that vital capital expenditure we defined earlier, and it requires breathtaking amounts of money to sustain year over year. Similarly, urbanization plays a massive role in all of this. In 1951, the urban population was just 17.3%. By 2011, it had nearly doubled to 31.2%. As people move from rural areas to highly concentrated cities, it undeniably forces the government to spend more. Dense urban centers require far more complex civil administration. They need extensive public health infrastructure, complex municipal water supplies, public parks, and highly specialized sanitation systems. Urbanization basically creates a concentrated demand for public services that is incredibly expensive to maintain. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. We've seen how inflation, urbanization, and defense play their roles. But as a researcher, I always come back to the social drivers. Our collective demands on the state, our desire for better infrastructure, specialized welfare departments, and robust social security nets, these are the ultimate architects of its ever-growing budget. Every single time we expect the state to solve a new societal problem, we are adding another page to the ledger. So ask yourself, how do your own expectations of what a government should do directly shape the financial realities we've explored today? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. Keep questioning the numbers, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.